Yeah, and I'm going to carry on from Laura's presentation and just give you a bit of an overview of the Grenfell Phase 2 inquiry. She touched on it there. There were several recommendations that came out of it, and although they are recommendations at the moment, they're not regulation, they're not law. I think it's important that we look at these as an industry, because it's important that you understand where the industry might be going. So just a little bit of background, a little bit of history. We had the Phase 1 report, which was published in 2019, and the Phase 1 report specifically explored what happened on the night of the 14th of June, and just explored the events and what happened in what order. The Phase 2 report, which was published earlier this month, specifically looked at the causes of those events, including how the towers came to be in the exact situation that they were. And we've already heard from Laura about some of the implications that we've seen from the Building Safety Act. But I think, as I said before, it's important to understand that there will be significant pressure from the survivors of Grenfell and from the victims' families for those recommendations to become law. So it's important we have that conversation. Those of you who are on social media will probably have seen this slide in the days after the Grenfell report was published earlier this month. And it's this web of blame. The Phase 2 inquiry was 1,700 pages long, so I'm not going to pretend that 2 weeks after it's published I have read it all. I've read the recommendations, and I've read a bit of chapter 1, but that's about it. It will, maybe this time next year you could ask me the detail of the full 1,700 pages. But the recommendations are very damning, as I think you would expect, of all those organisations on there, and to varying different levels. I won't go into details of all the failings, but briefly, government didn't have appropriately skilled people in post. There was specific blame to the individual who wasn't named, who had responsibility for building regulations and approved documents, that person was given too much autonomy and was able to make decisions without reference to anybody else. And lots of decisions didn't get made, even though this person had been given the information. So blame was laid there. There was blame laid with the BBA, the British Board of Agreement, and LABC, for failing to ensure that the evidence placed on their certificates was accurate or even based on evidence. Those three organisations, those three manufacturers, Arconic, Celotex and Kingspan, in varying degrees misled their customers, whether that was in the marketing, whether that was in rigging tests, but to play the odds in their favour and to say something which was inaccurate. The NHBC was open to manipulation by its customers because it didn't want to lose any business. And then we've got the main construction actors. We've got Studio E, which was the architect, Ryden, which was the main contractor, and Harley, the cladding subcontractor. None of those three organisations were clear who had design liability for the basics of the building, for the building design, for the choice of materials, for the suitability of any of those products. None of them were clear. Each of them thought it was somebody else's responsibility in that supply chain. There was a fire safety strategy which was supposed to be provided by Exova in the middle there. They never provided their report and they were never chased for it. Kensington and Chelsea's building control department didn't check that the plans met building regulations. So it really was a whole web of blame, and everybody on that picture, to a greater or lesser extent, was responsible for that tragedy in one way or another. Oops, I think we missed a slide there. I know this is a busy slide and I'm not going to go through it all. I expect many of you will want to take a picture, but this is just some of the key recommendations that I've written down that I think will affect us the most. I think one of the biggest changes, if it becomes regulation, will be this single government department, second bullet point down, responsible for all issues relating to fire safety, and also there being one government construction a department that looks at construction as well, and an expansion of the building safety regulator. I can't remember who mentioned it earlier, but we've got 3 separate government departments that look after construction in varying forms, which isn't easy for any of us to navigate if we're going between departments and we're not quite sure who picks it up. That department would also take responsibility for assessing the conformity of construction products and issuing certificates, taking away any doubts about independence, something I think personally would be a great help to industry. In addition, this point here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th bullet point down, this review of the statutory guidance and building regulations. Not necessarily saying anyone in this room does this, but I think there's been perhaps a confusion about guidance and building regulations, and perhaps in some fractions people think they're one and the same thing, and they're not. Guidance is just that, it is guidance, but the building regulations are the law. And finally, this review of the building control process, which I know we spoke about a little bit earlier in the panel debate, and looking at whether we take away the opportunity for commercial organisations to be involved in building control. As we were saying earlier, there is a challenge there. It takes away some of that independence if you know that actually you need to please your client and give them the answer they want. But I think this is the biggie. If this comes in, this will be a huge challenge for the construction sector, this proposal for a licensing scheme. So for somebody within the Tier 1 contractor to take personal liability for the delivery of that building at the very end. I don't know whether there are many directors who would want to take on that level of risk. And how would they know that they were, that all parts of that project were being delivered ethically and within the regulations? That's going to be a huge challenge. I know we've seen that before with other things such as the Corporate Manslaughter Act or health and safety at work, but this will be a huge challenge for the construction sector. Laura's talked a bit about competence today, and those of you who were here yesterday will also have heard from Hannah Clark at the Industry Competence Steering Group. And I think there's quite a role for a trade association here, whether that's the PCA in this sector or whether it's any of the other trade or professional bodies that exist. The Building Safety Act is really clear that you now need to demonstrate that you are competent, and not just you as an individual in your technical competence, but also that your organisation is competent. And what do we mean by that? Well, for an organisation to be competent, you need to have money in the bank, you need to have appropriate insurances, you need to be employing people properly. And I think the trade body does have a role here. That's something that we do really well, not just the PCA, but trade organisations generally. We audit our members. We have a membership criteria. And I think we will start to see that the Trade Association has a place within the Building Safety Act regime, whether formally or informally. I know I'm preaching to the converted today because you're all here and you're learning, but I also think when we talk about competence, we are also going to think about what that means in the long term. Many of you will have done your CSSW qualification. You might have done it 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. You're here today, which is fantastic. You're continuing to learn, but there are others within our industry, within our sector of the industry, and within other sectors who have done their qualification once, and that's it. And under this regime, I'm not sure that the building safety regulator would say that that's okay. I'm not sure that they would say that that is competence. We need to be keeping our skills up to date, and I think, again, that's something that we will have to consider going forward. So just keeping on the topic of competence, and again, as I said, we had Hannah here yesterday with us. This Industry Competence Steering Group was set up in 2017, not long after the fire took place, to start to talk about competence and understand not just the qualifications needed within the individual sectors, but also what the knowledge, the skills, and the behaviours are needed within each of those individual sectors. Earlier we spoke about the architects and that they were praised in the phase 2 report for getting their act together and for really quickly deciding what competence looks like within their sector. And I don't know if you can see them up there, but they are one of these groups. I can't quite remember which one they fall under. But they dealt with their stuff really quickly. I'm sure someone just shouted it out. Thank you, I can't see. But competence is way more, as I said, than just a qualification. And to give you an example, you might be incredibly technically competent, but if you are going out to a client and you're deliberately mis-selling a solution which makes you more money, it doesn't matter how competent you are in the technical skills, your behaviours are wrong. And the Building Safety Act now says that that is not okay. That does not lead to competence. That is not a competent individual. So some of those sectors, as I've said, architects being one, have been able to really quickly get their act together and work out what competence looks like. But if we take working group 2, which is installers, that is massive. Because this is not just competence from a fire safety perspective, this is competence across the whole of the construction sector. And we know how many sectors there are within construction. It is massive. So working group 2 has broken itself down into at least 5 different subsectors within it to start to then work out what competence within each of those subsectors looks like. So interiors will include things like dry lining, plastering, civils, engineering services. It's quite self-explanatory there. As of last Friday, we have now been asked to chair 4 of those groups, which is an incredible achievement for the Property Care Association because it puts us front and centre of the changes that are coming in as a result of the Building Safety Act. So we have been asked to chair the wood preserving and timber treatment group, wall tie replacement, invasive weed removal, and most importantly for you in this room, ground gas and water protection, which is incredibly important. So we'll be setting those groups up within the coming weeks and months, and I'd love to hear from those of you who want to get involved and who want to set out what the knowledge, skills and behaviours for each of those sectors should be. And then you will see that over the next few years, the whole of the industry will have to update their qualifications and their training to make sure that it meets the competencies set out. I am going to end it there, but hopefully that's a really quick whistle-stop tour of what the impact of those recommendations in the phase 2 report will be.